Hi. As we think about the biblical base for small group ministry, a question that often arises is, what did they actually do in those small group meetings? We know that the early church was based on house-to-house ministry. They'd come together and celebrate as well, but the base of the church were those houses. In fact, one verse in Colossians 3:16 says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God." When you're reading the New Testament, you need to reflect as if you were in a house church. I don't think we can really even understand the one another's, the Lord's Supper, care for one another apart from that house church base. And here in Colossians, we read that they edified one another, as it says there in Colossians 3. And there was a lot of flexibility. You know, I like the 4 W's: welcome, worship, word, and witness. I like certain questions. I need to always remember that building others up, the one another's, is the most important, that people go away satisfied and edified because Jesus was present. And that's what they did in those early house churches. You know, we read it, there was evangelism, singing. They ate the Lord's Supper as a meal and remembered Jesus Christ. There were announcements, because remember, back then, there weren't buildings. In fact, the first building that we read about was in the year 150 after Christ died. People were encouraged to open their homes not only for the house church, but also as a hotel for missionaries and travelers and so forth. So hospitality was so essential. Now, what about the size of those early house churches? You know, some people have said that, well, they were just like regular churches today. They could fit 100, 150 people. We do read in Acts chapter 2 about the upper room that could fit 120 people. But in my research, that was the exception. The normal size of an early church, house church, was about 10, 20 people, you know, even 8. Because really, instead of house churches, I like to talk about apartment churches. They were small. In fact, those who have researched the context of the early church say that the early cities back then were more populated than Calcutta. They were stacked upon one another. The neighbors could hear what was going on in those house churches. Picture those early house churches not as spread out suburbia, but rather cities where people could hear each other. Another important word is the word oikos. And that word actually means house in Greek, but it means more than just the house or the location. It talks about the extended family, which also often included servants and family members, cousins, and so forth. And that's how the gospel spread in ancient times. And that's an important word for us too. The best way to reach people for Jesus is to reach those who we know best, and then to invite those people to our own small groups. Another big question is, how did they raise up leaders back then? You know, we know that they didn't send those leaders to Bible school or seminary. Those who opened their homes often became the leader. And so it was a very dynamic development. Of course, they always led in teams. The New Testament speaks of plurality of leaders, not just one leader, and we need to do the same today. So we see that there was a growth, a very natural growth of leadership in the early church. But we must not think of those early house churches as independent or separate entities, as if they were doing their own thing. No, there was a connection. There was a connection in leadership. There were the apostles, the bishops, the elders. But those leaders were oftentimes over other house churches. And so there was a leadership structure. And those house churches would come together in celebration whenever they could. We read that it was quite a structured coming together in Acts 2:42 through 46, that they met daily in the temple, hearing the apostles' teaching. And then also in 1 Corinthians it says, when the whole church comes together, which means that individual house churches were also meeting. And now sometimes they didn't meet together in a celebration regularly, maybe because of persecution. They could only come together on a beach or in a larger house. But we know there was connection among those individual house churches. So often pastors are hesitant to release the lay people, to raise up lay people, because after all, they've been trained to do everything. And there's a fear of releasing. But I want to encourage you, pastor, you're going to expand the base of your ministry. And yes, there's going to be a time of training. There's going to be coaching of each leader. And yet, in the heart of every pastor, there needs to be a freedom to say, I want to equip the lay people to do the work of the ministry. Remember the book, Biblical Foundations for the Small Group Based Church. I think it will really help you to grow in your understanding of the biblical base for small group ministry. God bless you. If you like this video, please click on like and subscribe to our channel, but also check out the resources on our website.